Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be presenting part of my.
Speak up.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, yes, you have 3 days, you have to speak
Okay.
up.
Okay. All right. Now you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So I was saying thank you so much for the opportunity to present some of my PhD work. It's just one of the themes from my results for my PhD, where I just thought it was interesting to actually develop it into a paper, which will read Indigenous Knowledge Systems as Agroecology for Rural Farmers Enhanced Food Security Amid Climate Change Vagaries in Southern Zimbabwe. So just as background and rationale for this paper, we all know that all of us, we need food. We all need food and we cannot live without it. And when food grows scarce, futures are threatened, which means somewhere, somehow, whether where you are from, somewhere, somehow you have to make sure that you have ways or methods of making sure that food is there. And as it has been spoken of from the morning or even wherever we go now, everyone knows that climate change is actually wreaking havoc on local people's agricultural activities and affecting their food security. I cannot emphasize the importance of actually dealing with the problems of climate change in general. Even the United Nations Security Council, they also recognize that climate change poses a clear and a present danger to global security, health, and well-being of communities. And a delay in efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change will miss an opportunity mostly for local communities to secure a livable, food secure future for all. So with this being said, you find out that most of the local communities or the so-called rural communities, they are said to have low adaptive capacity to some of these shocks, especially in the global south, where I come from. So you find that it is noble to recognize that these impacts of climate change in the global south are multidimensional and should be approached with caution, which means they are not the same anyway. So these present threats of climate change, they vastly outpace tend to exacerbate current climate change and food insecurity challenges. This has seen agricultural community being forced to industrialize and commercialize on food production systems. However, the current capital, you see that it is capitalism or the so-called modern agricultural systems, they've actually failed in actually fielding the world's poor and protecting the environment. This is according to Glisman in 2018. Instead, smallholder farmers using their traditional knowledge systems, of which in this paper I would like to term them as agroecology, as I'll explain in the following slides, they've produced more food and are believed to be the most food secure. This is out here in 2020. Even the IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agriculture, in 2023, they also note that small-scale or rural farmers, they grow up to 70% of the food produced in the low-income countries. So then, now we need to understand what agroecology is. From conceptualizing agroecology in my paper, I saw that it's not a concept that we can, it's on what exactly entails agroecology. It is a concept that emerged in the 1980s and viewed as a resistance to the Green Revolution that focused on industrialization and of all aspects of food production and increasing the corporate control and the dominance of the food system. Then agroecology then emerged to reverse this agricultural industrialization and the primary focus being the individual farm level, which means they saw that the industrialization was actually destroying the environment as much as it would have made some of the communities food secure, but it had a negative effect, especially on the biodiversity sustainability. So in this paper, agroecology as a concept, it actually has 3 strands, which I'll talk about. Of which the first one, I think is the most common one that most of us talk about, which is a scientific discipline and is rooted in multiple disciplines, including agronomy, ecology, soil science, plant physiology, and many others. By integrating these multiple disciplines, agroecology as a scientific discipline and finding ways to then mitigate or reduce the impacts of climate change. Secondly, agroecology has also been considered as a social movement, especially by scholars such as Pimbet in 2018. It is closely associated with agricultural It is closely associated with agrarian social movements, including food sovereignty movements that we've been talking about in the morning, but these are rare in the global south. As a social movement, agroecology focuses on the entire food system, which indispensably includes consideration of the political ecology and aspect of equity, participation, empowerment, food sovereignty, and rural development. This aspect of agroecology calls more substantial participation among policy and decision makers, including farmers, of which this is still a challenge in most global south countries, to actually include farmers in decision making in terms of them being food secure. So the social movement context of agroecology, it emphasizes mostly on the protection of the fundamental human rights, which is mostly pushed by the civil society instead of the farmers themselves. And the last one, which is of interest in my study, is the one that was also defined by Glisman in 2018, which notes that agroecology, it encompasses a set of agricultural activities that involve utilizing natural processes that create synergies among various aspects of the ecosystem and agricultural productivity. The practices include agroforestry, mixed farming, intercropping, legume integration, composting, or using livestock manure. And this privileges the context specificity of rural farmers' food production by considering the socio-ecological context within which the local food system operates. So based on these principles mentioned above, on all these different strands that can be associated with agroecology, it can be assumed that agroecology does not espouse a simple approach to agricultural production. Instead, it lends an interdisciplinary and pluralistic perspective. However, for this paper, I'll focus more on the last strand, on agricultural practices and how they've been embraced as indigenous knowledge by the rural farmers. Now, after this, we then need to know what do you mean by the indigenous knowledge systems? Knowledge on its own is a subjective phenomenon, and people can spend the whole day trying to debate on what it is. But for me, it is a social construction that results from and is constantly being reshaped by everyday encounters and discontinuities that people meet on a day-to-day basis. It is a social process in terms of multiplicity of actors, networks, through which certain kinds of technical and social information are communicated and negotiated. So it is a negotiation on an everyday basis. Then these concepts of traditional knowledge, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, they are often used similarly. Some of them, they even go to use like organic farming as some of the indigenous knowledge. So traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge, this one now it refers to a cumulative body of knowledge, practices, beliefs that evolve through the adaptive processes and are handed over down from generation to generation through cultural transmission and relate to the relationships between living beings and their environments. So with this definition, I want us to focus more on the practices there, or what they really do on a day-to-day basis. Then local and over time and is unique to a given culture or society. So it's not something that is homogeneous or something that we can say it's the same everywhere. It is unique to each and every given community or culture or society. Therefore, this paper interrogates how rural farmers have developed these ways, these traditional ways in coping with the impacts of climate change in this area. However, we need to note that as much as it can be hid, indigenous knowledge is also fragmented. It does not exist in its totality in any one place or in any individual, hence rendering it incomprehensive for sustainable livelihoods and for food secure generations. Then for my study, my research philosophy and the conceptual framework, the assumptions are in the study embedded within the interpretive framework of social construction that emphasizes that social realities are the nature of the context there, and that the meanings are not individual in nature, but instead they are constantly negotiated. Pause and say it's like is context. This paper then emphasizes indigenous knowledge from local farmers and their experiences over time on agriculture as key aspects in building sustainable livelihoods. So I'll not do much because of the time on the sustainable livelihoods approach, but it is an approach that says that organizations, communities, or institutions, they have to rely on 5 types of assets, which are human, natural, physical, social, and financial. Maybe for the research design and methodology, most of the things I've already said them on the issue of social reality being grounded in people's experiences. Then for my data collection, I used a mixed methods approach, but I mostly focused on qualitative methods. I did life history interviews of of trying to understand how these people that have stayed in one particular area have actually transformed and evolved over a period of over 5 decades. Then for my analysis, I used thematic analysis. For my qualitative data, for in vivo and Atlas, then quantitatively, I used the SPSS version 28. Because of the time, these were the results of some of the indigenous knowledge systems that people said they actually rely on. So on the left side, you'll see that it is the percentage of farmers using the indigenous strategy itself. Then on the right side, it is the percentage of farmers with the... So as you can see that there are differences there. So you can find out that a farmer cannot be engaging in that particular strategy, but perceive or think or you have actually seen it working in some areas. So of interest in Gwanda in Zimbabwe, I'll just talk about 2 here. That were of interest, which was intercropping and use of self-prepared seeds. Intercropping, where they said when you plant your maize, instead of putting beans or any other leguminous plants in other areas, you just put them in the same line there. And when you ask them how they do, they say some of them, they don't even know why they're doing it, but they're saying it's something that they've been told. Mostly significant in the sense that it will be the elderly people where when it's harvest time, it's not everyone who just get into the field. It will be the selected few elderly in the community who first get into the field. They then select the best yields of the particular crop. After doing that, they then go and preserve it in a certain place before everyone else go to harvest. And this has been working for them instead of relying on treated seeds that can be bought or that are being sent from places from outside. So for me now, areas of concern affecting agroecology and the indigenous knowledge systems and food security in these areas, we'll find out that farmers that they're actually engaging, like migration, most of the youth there, they migrate to the nearest area, which is South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. Then some, they also now rely on remittances. Then there's also the rise of artisanal small-scale mining there. Then there's also internal savings and lending groups that are actually being done, all these other adaptive strategies. It will be easy for these knowledge systems to be forgotten as time goes on, because they no longer see the value in actually depending on this indigenous agriculture. Then the lessening knowledge dissemination, you'll find out that because of some of the strategies I already mentioned above, like migration and artisanal small-scale mining, there's now that generational gap in communities where you see that communities now left with the elderly and the children. Generation going down, it's somehow being broken, because instead of those people to actually adopt it from their parents, giving them to their children, it's no longer there. So which means when all these elders are not there, that information will no longer be available in that particular area. We also have a deteriorating social capital, which means that the bonding and the breeding capitals of which social and there's artisanal small-scale mining there that has caused a whole lot of conflicts. That means communities can no longer work together. And in the long run, if that social capital is not there, that means the indigenous knowledge systems can no longer be used. Then the external support that is not sustainable, which in most cases it leads to dependency syndrome and false hope. The external support in this case, I'm talking external support in the sense that these are rural communities, then the government tries to chip in. Like in Zimbabwe, there was what we called command agri to these farmers, of which because of the political situation, not everyone gets the inputs. So they say it would rather depend on our own strategy instead of depending on any external support somewhere. So as a conclusion, it came out that a pivotal role in ensuring food security for rural farmers. Depending on treated seeds or relying on fertilizers, prove these methods to be agroecological. Since indigenous knowledge is essential for subsistence farmers, it is often suggested that it must be gathered and documented in a coherent fashion to avoid agroecological practices vanishing, as reiterated by some farmers who said that if I die, I don't know if my grandchildren will actually be able to use this information. However, it is paramount to note that food security does not depend on crop production alone, whether at household, region, or country level. It depends to a greater extent on people's ability to command the resources to acquire the food they need. So all capitals must be in unison, the capitals I spoke about earlier on, if communities are to be food secure. The major problem, however, lies in farmers' use of high-level chemicals and fertilizers provided by the state in the form of command agriculture, as I already alluded to, of which are most of these seeds, they're imported. And sometimes they are not really effective. So they would rather prefer to go back and use their own seeds. Then local practices may also disappear because of the intrusion of foreign technologies and development concepts that promise short-term gains or solutions to problems without being capable of sustaining them. Accordingly, care must be taken not to undermine effective indigenous practices that have sustained these rural farmers for many decades. This paper sought to tap the advantages of the available indigenous knowledge systems and seeing if it can ensure enhanced food security in Gwanda.
Thanks a lot. Perhaps there are some questions for clarification. Yes, please.
Thank you. You know, you cited two scholars saying that in low-income countries and in general in many developing countries and so on, the highest incidence of within the farming community is that of small farmers, small marginal and so on and so forth, which is indeed the smallholders and so on and so forth. But you also said that they're most food secure. Now, I think that needs to be checked because all the evidence which I have seen is just the opposite. So they constitute the majority, but they are the most food insecure. Now, why does that happen and so on? You know, you know, these two references which you cited. So maybe, yeah.
It was, okay. Can I respond? Okay, yeah, that was deliberate. I actually put it there deliberately because food security itself as a concept is very debatable. I had to put it that way because I had to ask these farmers of saying, by using these methods, do you think to them food security was making sure that they have food on a day-to-day basis and that their families actually do not sleep on empty stomachs? And for them, to them, if they get food in the morning, the afternoon, in the evening, to them, they are food secure.